Good morning and welcome to this week's Grow, where we gather to recharge, organize, and work here as members of MWEG. We are so glad that we have a lot of people joining us live today. And if you're watching this recording, we hope that you get the information that you're looking for as we have a great guest with us. We have Rebecca Nowatchik, hope I'm saying that correctly, Director of External Partnerships from Secure Family Initiatives. And I'm just going to give a little introduction about her. Rebecca is an educator, facilitator, and community organizer with 20 plus years of experience managing legislative and corporate campaigns focused on the economy, occupational safety, and community well-being. Rebecca facilitates the collaboration of SFI's organizational strategies and forges relationships with key partners like MWEG. And she helps with their members campaign. Prior to being with SFI, Rebecca taught middle school and she developed community education curriculum and has served as an executive role at a community organization focused on improving community health and quality life. We are so grateful that she is joining us today. She has significant experience and expertise talking about from her knowledge as a military spouse and a daughter of a combat veteran that has fueled her passion to improve the lives of military families. So welcome, Rebecca. We have Emma Petty Adams, who is one of our co-executive directors of MWEG, who's going to be speaking with Rebecca and answering questions. We will save some time at the end for some Q&A if you want to stick around and ask some questions. And so keep that, or you can put some questions in the chat. So I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Emma.
Thanks, everyone. So glad to see you here today. Thanks for coming, talk about this important topic and to meet Rebecca. I have to tell you, Rebecca and I had a call late last year, and my email inbox is full of a lot of intros, as I'm sure yours is, Rebecca. It's full of a lot of intros of people like, you need to meet this person, you need to talk to this person. And sometimes you have to kind of sort through and choose carefully, because otherwise your entire week would be spent having new meetings with new people, with organizations. And so this is one intro that we made that was intriguing. And Rebecca and I, after a lot of back and forth, set up a time to talk. I'm so glad we did. We had a really delightful hour spent together, and we found so many, for use of a very, I don't know, Silicon Valley word, synergies between our organizations. A lot of things that we have in common as women, women-run organizations who are working hard to empower individuals to be, impactful advocates. Very thoughtfully cross-partisan, very thoughtfully trying to make sure there's diversity within the ranks and ideology and geography and all those other good things. And the other wonderful thing about SFI and Rebecca is that a lot of their work is really complementary to MWEG's. So they work on things that we don't work on, and we look forward to it, as well as some overlap. So we look forward to being a resource to one another over the years and to really learn from Rebecca, your particular expertise in this area. So I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce SFI and yourself further, and then we can get into some conversation about some very much in the news issues right now that you're working on.
Thank you so much, Emma. And I'm so grateful to be here. It's a pleasure to meet all of you. And you just want to, foot stomp what you were saying, Emma, around shared values, shared principles, and just, I think, living in our bodies, in our lives, right, of being women, I think, in this work and wanting to uphold our American institutions, right? And so, yeah, so a little bit about myself. So as the introduction said, I'm a military spouse. I worked as a teacher, a community advocate, and an organizer in various different, communities that I'd lived in, and different issues, but all really focused on quality of life and regular living conditions, like improving living conditions of regular people like me, right, and my neighbors. And I think I grew up in a fairly rural area where, when I was little, really watched the situations that my family was in. There were decisions that were made, right, by governments, some folks I would never meet, right, all of the time, without asking us, the people that lived there, what we were experiencing in our day-to-day lives. And that's really what drove me to this organization, I joined SFI in 2020 when I was actually volunteering on base in the family with the family support services, and was hitting my head against the wall. I was like, who the hell is organizing? Who's organizing military spouses? Oh my gosh, oh my goodness. And was able to get connected to our organization, and then was hired about 3 years ago. So I've been in the organization for 3 years. And our organization was founded by 2 active duty spouses who said what was resonating to me from being a little girl, right? No more making decisions about us without us. And that's really what formed our organization. And I think I have slides. If that's, oh, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, great. Yeah, we can just go to the next one. So our mission is to mobilize diverse military partners, parents, kids, and veterans to vote and advocate for their communities, especially on issues of foreign policy, national security, and democracy. And for us, foreign policy, our national security, what's happening all around the world, those are kitchen table issues for our families. There, I don't think is a day or a night that goes by where I'm not having a conversation with my spouse about how things are looking overseas, and what the implications are. We're a community that's very cued into what's happening in the world, and because that just literally directly impacts us at the day-to-day level. Our community also moves a lot. So, I think we share top issues that are similar to the majority of Americans, right? We live with financial pressures. Those are compounded by moves. Most of our folks move, 2 to 3 years if you're active duty. And it's really challenging for our families to be dual income families, which also contributes to that, because spouse unemployment is something that is very challenging given the relocation, and specifically for those in our community that have licenses, right? Sometimes those licenses don't transfer. If you are stationed overseas, that provides additional challenges. So, all of this really compounds the financial pressures that I think we share with a lot of other Americans. Food insecurity has also been an issue that is raised to the top of some of a lot of the other MSOs we work with, military spouse organizations we work with, and challenges to access to quality healthcare. And I would just add that a good percentage of our families and our membership also experience feeling unsafe, right? So when we're moved around, you're separated from your community. You are usually separated from your immediate family, and sometimes you move to a place that is very unfriendly to you. And this is especially true for our military families of color, right? And so we have a lot of members in our organization that have experienced feeling unsafe, harassed in communities outside of their duty stations, have experienced racial profiling and harassment. So this is just something, again, that I think we share in common with the general public. But because usually, we're behind the gate, a lot of folks don't hear how that impacts us in our community specifically. And I want to name that, protracted conflicts abroad, right? My husband enlisted in 99, prior to 9/11. A lot of our members have spouses who have served, between the 18 to 23 year mark. So um, we have been in conflict for a very long time in our American history, our recent American history. And so those protracted conflicts do directly cause harm to the people we love, which exacerbates a lot of these challenges facing the military community and all of the neighborhoods that we live in, right? And so we really came together to break down that military-civilian divide and educate those outside of our community about not only our culture, but also to be at the table when these decisions are being made, because we believe that that's how the best decisions get made in our government, right? Is when we listen to the people who they're impacted. And those for you that aren't familiar totally with our community, right? We right now currently fewer than 1% of Americans serve in our all volunteer military. It's around 1.3 million in the active duty side, and then I would say about an additional 1.2 million in the reservist side. About 50% of these folks, of these service members, are married. 39 and 40% of those folks have children, and 92% of military spouses are women. So when we're talking about our membership base being centered on military spouses, we are talking about a predominantly female demographic. And our community is extremely racially diverse, which I think unless you're in the community, sometimes you don't know this. But 50% of service members identify as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color. And we are, as a community, very young. So with that, within the whole community, about 50% are under the age of 30, right? And so very diverse. Our membership is very female based, and and we organize with that grounding in that. I can go to the next slide too. Thanks. So how do we organize? So given how diverse our community is, we tell the truth about who serves. And we do that to not only be authentic and have integrity, but also build an inclusive and representative and powerful base of people. And I have this quote from our organizing director, Brandy Jones, where she says, right, as we expand our organization's base of military family advocates, we want to ensure that our membership accurately represents our broad racial and ethnic diversity of the military-wide community, and that we make a strategic connection to demilitarization and racial justice. And so when I get into all of our pillars and the work that we work in, we are very clear about that grounding, and we are clear that when we center our families of color, everyone, including my family who is white, benefits, right? And we move forward together. And so a lot of our work, all of our campaigns, all of our legislative actions, our leadership development models are based off of that intention. And as Director of External Partnerships, I am very excited about building partnerships, including with your organization, about with organizations that really share this value, right? The value around freedom, equity, justice, humanity, all these core central tenets of America, and really leaning into how do we create more conditions where every person has an equal voice? How do we ensure that our government is a representative democracy? And how do we ensure that everyone in our country has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? And that means all of our families, all of our diverse families. And so how we do this, we organize actually, I think, very similar to y'all, which is really exciting for me as an organizer. So we believe in building people power. So we, despite our families being literally at the center of the Department of Defense's budget, which is the largest portion of our nation's spending, our stories, our challenges, and our experiences are very rarely told to Congress, right? And so we believe that change happens when our people get in the room with these decision makers, are able to share their stories and their experiences, and do so in a way that can move forward policy to improve conditions for all, right? So to do that, we run legislative campaigns. So, for example, our last year, our military families of color caucuses. So these are caucuses that folks can join who identify as Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, or Asian American, shared their stories with the Senate Armed Services Committee, and really advise these members of government on potential leadership, or on potential future policy pathways pertaining to our community's needs. And so we were extremely successful. We did, I can't even remember how many meetings they were doing. We were virtual meetings. We, flew people to the Hill. Very exciting. And those recommendations actually made it into this year's National Defense Authorization Act, which is really exciting. Now we get to work on the implementation of some of these policies, right? And so this was a huge win for us. Like we now are able to celebrate that. We have a group of leaders now who are excited about moving those things forward, and are working with members of Congress now who we were successful with to additionally add more to the docket, right? More policy priorities. We also defend and advance the right to vote. So the majority of our community, because of frequent moves, we rely on absentee voting, which I'm sure, as we've all been following the last few years, this is something that's been increasingly politicized, brought under attack. So we try to set the record straight about who is voting absentee. We regularly insert ourselves in both legal and rhetorical fights over voting rights. And we work with other communities who rely on mail or absentee voting, right? So we believe that we're stronger together, and it's for all of us, right? All of us ability to participate in our democracy. And then we'd also do a lot of voter education, nonpartisan voter education. So when you're stationed overseas or even in a different state, you might not know where to register. You might not know what additional rights you might have. And so, basically how, what the deadlines are, because the deadlines can be super complicated, especially when there are mail delays, particularly in the folks that are stationed in the Pacific. So we do a lot of this voter education, and a lot of this is peer-to-peer. So we have an incredible program called our Voting Ambassadors Program, where we have members of the military community that do peer-to-peer education, folks that have lived it, familiar with their state guidelines, to make sure that our community is participating. So, all of this to say, our work really centers in 3 pillars, and if we could go to the next slide. So we work to expand the military vote and defend democracy. This looks like, in addition to the voter education, we do state level engagement. So a lot of the work we did in the last year was legislatively trying to beat back some of these bad bills that would erode voting rights and absentee voting specifically. We also do some federal legislation. Some of that is around some of the time returns that voters overseas and military families have to return their ballots to make sure that mail gets there in time. And then we also lead 2 coalitions. So we lead an organization called the Military Vote Coalition, which is over 20 other veteran service organizations and military service organizations that work to ensure that the military is participating in voting at the same rate as civilians. And then we also lead a coalition called the Americans Creed Coalition, which is really about our core democratic values and how our community is continuing to defend those. We do work around decisions over war and peace. So the one example of this is we were extremely active with some other coalition partners to attempt to repeal the 2002 Iraq War Authorization. So it's the AUMF. It was an authorization that originally entered the United States into war with Iraq. Clearly, we know that war is over. And so it's really cleaning this up cleaning up these no longer relevant war authorizations to kind of rein in, how our country interacts right overseas. And then we also have a campaign team that's working on nuclear non-proliferation. And so one of the things we were working on this past year was to ensure that the Radioactive Exposure Compensation Act moved forward. This was the bill that gives financial compensation to people who are exposed to nuclear explosions during some of the nuclear testing, uranium miners, people who've been exposed to nuclear waste, right? So we have a lot of folks in our community that, have been exposed to these things and work around these types of toxins. And so we want to make sure that together with other organizations, including indigenous and tribal nations, that we are working together to make sure these folks get fair compensation for those exposures. And then we also have a portfolio around protecting civil rights. So when the military decides to move a family, which is called a PCS in our world, permanent change of station, the family's identities and composition are rarely taken into account during that process. So as I mentioned earlier, sometimes that PCS would put that family, especially families of color, into hostile locations with ineffective support services. So that can have a profound impact on a family. And just as an example, 1 in 5 active duty service members of color and about 10% of active duty spouses of color have been reported to be subject to racial slurs at least 5 times in the past year. And so that's just not right. That's not correct. And so we have a whole campaign with recommendations that I'd love to share with y'all on ways policies can prevent and mitigate that thing happening, and where our families can finally find an increased sense of safety when the Department of Defense moves us. So that leaves me to our current moment. So in this moment, and I know we're going to have a more robust conversation, but I can keep it a little high level. Really, we have 3 priorities right now. We want to make sure that we are protecting the military's professional career leadership versus partisan appointees. And so last year we saw an attempt led by Senator Tommy Tuberville to put a hold on senior leadership promotions, which are very normal things that happen all the time, because he did not agree with a government policy, right, which was an inappropriate use of his power in the committee. He is Senate Armed Services Committee. And so we have seen increased polarization or politicization over the last few months with senior leadership. And really what this does, particularly when there are these blanket statements, is it erodes the sense of trust our families have within the system that we are serving and within the institution that we are serving. And so, enlisted, I'm from an enlisted family, and officer families, right, are both being affected by this. And we're concerned really about how this not only just the politicization, but also the deployment of these firings could create a vacuum in our military's leadership, and really how we as families can have confidence in our leaders to give orders with sound judgment and noble aim, when these blanket promotions or dismissals are really contingent on these political appeasements, right? So it's something that we're seeing culturally as being an issue, and is in a very, very real time impacting our community. I would also say some of the other pieces that we're concerned with is this increased both rhetoric and deployment of increased militarization at the border, at the southern border, and some anxiety around the lack of current clarity, right? So this is a shift in our national security, an increased or elevated shift, I should say, in our national security policy. And we really, again, like we've been doing since our inception as an organization, is stressing the importance of diplomacy, of compassion. And I was sharing, I think before we got started, there were two senators that actually I was fairly encouraged by. I saw that Senator Cornyn from Texas said in a report the other day, right, preferring to call the humanitarian, instead of an invasion right at the border, a humanitarian public safety and public health crisis, and how the word invasion really brings up other comparisons that really don't apply. And then I also was encouraged by Senator Curtis from Utah saying, while deportation is a vital tool in upholding the law, it really must be wielded with proper proportion of compassion. And so, as we are advising decision makers on how we interact overseas, we are saying the same thing here domestically, right? We want to make sure we're prioritizing our tools of diplomacy first. Yes, and I think that's where I think I'm going to stop for now. There's the last slide we have is just ways to get involved. We have different teams. We have campaign teams for folks that are military connected or interested. We have and those are folks that are working on our legislative priorities. We also have our caucuses. So in addition to our BIPOC caucuses, we also have a white spouse caucus, which I run, that are for white people that want to be good allies and work collaboratively in fighting for equity for all. And then we also have a pledge I can share with our partners at the American Creed Coalition around really informing and reminding all of our leaders that they need to uphold the values and the principles of the American Constitution and the American's Creed. And so that's for anyone. You don't have to be military connected, just be a patriot. You can sign that. And then we have monthly member calls similar to you all. We've got our next one next Tuesday. So I'm happy to share that in whatever follow-up as well. Yes. So thank you so much. And I'd love to dive into anything you all want to talk about.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. I just put a comment in the chat. If you're willing and able, if you could put your location in the chat, it's always really fun and to see everyone else across in the chat. If you want to drop where you're calling in from, it's really fun to see what we have represented in terms of the geography of the group gathered here today. So maybe we could, we got starting. You're in New York, which is great. Idaho, great. Florida, Alabama, military spouse, woohoo. Rhode Island. Now our Utahs are showing up. Arizona, Nebraska, great. Keep them coming. It's always really helped us feel connected to one another, to see the diversity of geography. So first of all, I want to say those of you who are military spouses and are interested in getting involved with SFI, we definitely encourage you to look into it. I think it's like I said at the beginning, it's very much a complementary organization to MWAG, and I think there's skills that you'll learn in one that could be used in the other. And I know we'll be in touch over the years to see if there's things we can work on together. So maybe we could dive a little bit deeper, and if people have questions, they can put in the chat, and then we'll kind of close formally in a few minutes. And then those of you who want to stick around and ask additional questions, we'll stop the recording and you can come on camera and ask those. Can you maybe talk to us a little bit about, our MWEG members, immigration has been a long time issue for us, one that we've been working on since our inception. Many of us came to MWEG through kind of a lens of wanting to support and uphold the refugee resettlement program. And we also have a large percentage of our women and our members of our church who have a little bit more of a global outlook on things due to missions that may have been served overseas, or maybe in their congregations, they spent some time, with people with different status, different immigration status, and have learned to, have grown to really develop relationships. And so we as an organization are, very concerned about rhetoric, dehumanizing rhetoric, and such. We're concerned about about supporting bipartisan immigration policy. That doesn't mean we just have these massive swings back and forth in like executive orders every 4 years, according to who's in power. We think that's destabilizing. We think it's not compassionate, it's problematic. Can you talk to us more specifically about your concerns about the militarization at the border? And in addition, I don't know if you want to talk about the Alien Enemies Act. We're working on Sherilyn's here on this. Sherilyn's been working on an explainer about the Alien Enemies Act. I'd love to hear your perspective as a military spouse in your organization on both those issues.
Sure. So big picture, we believe in posse comitatus. So we believe in the separation of the military and domestic law enforcement. And we believe that domestic law enforcement can do their job within the guidelines of the Constitution. And so when we start graying or blurring that line between domestic law enforcement and federal troops, it creates not only confusion, but it also harms, it goes against the core tenets of our country, for one, but also just inappropriate use. The military is not trained, nor was it ever intended to do domestic law enforcement. That's not the intention of the military. And so that's our just base concern. And then I would say the other piece here, which I would say gets at some of the citizenship questions, right? So we have the militarization question, and then we also have, I would say concerning around equal protection. So we believe in the Equal Protections Clause. We believe in the 14th Amendment, and we believe that this is a core principle and a core right of all Americans. And so when we start departing from that, it gives me pause, because that's not the country, that's not our country. It goes against the core tenets of our country. And so, just some context, right? Equal Protection Clause, 14th Amendment, arose right after the Civil War, when and it was established right through tremendous struggle of people who became human when they became freed. And so I think back to all of the people who literally gave their life to establish that. And as a white woman, understand that my rights came from those folks. And so when I start seeing rhetoric that departs from equal protections, I am concerned for all of us, and really believe that we need to ensure that that does not happen. So so I think that's, I'm going to stop there, because I unless they're like, I'm happy to go into some of the specific EOs, but I want to stop and pause and see if there's any additional questions there.
Yeah, and I think on the basis of principles, I think MWEG is very much aligned with the things you're saying. I think it is especially powerful coming from the perspective of military and military spouses. One of the things that we've tried hard to do, we put out an official statement and a call to action this week around executive orders. And part of what we were trying to do with that is to kind of put a little bit more of a human face on the fact that an order or a change in an administrative rule, or the issuing of some sort of a administrative order, it's more than just something on paper. It actually has an immediate impact on people's lives. And even if the impact is not clear what it's ultimately going to be, it breeds confusion and fear and uncertainty. And that seems to be the case with a lot of these orders, particularly around the border right now, is no one really quite knows what's going to be enforced, how it's going to be enforced, the scope of it. No one really quite knows what's going to be held up in court versus what, won't be, to what extent. That one about sensitive space is an example that we're quite concerned with. And so I appreciate that you kind of note that there's a lot of uncertainty here, and there's a lot of, principled, there's a lot of reasons to be opposed to these sorts of actions on a principled basis. And we honestly don't want to almost don't want to wait to see how it plays out, because there's a lot of bad ways they could play out. So, maybe what we'll do is let's close down, we hit the 30-minute mark. Let's close down our official portion. And those of you who want to stay around, and we can ask some more questions of Rebecca about these issues in particular. We do encourage everyone who's watching either now or later to check out some of the calls to action that MWEG has created around executive orders. We will be going into greater detail around the border, around the Alien Enemies Act, around the militarization of the border, to look for some explainers. In these early days, it's really important to make sure you have access to good information, and that you have access to information like Rebecca's bringing us about the impact and about how other communities are feeling, especially communities that are directly impacted. So we really encourage you to kind of pause and work through that. And we want to be there to help you with that. And then we can collectively take action as needed. And we'll be in contact with Rebecca and with SFI about actions that they recommend or mobilization that they recommend, and kind of using their expertise. But I'll just thank you officially for this portion, and thanks to those of you who are watching, and we'll stop the recording and continue on for a couple more minutes.
Yes, so we'll thank everybody for coming to this grow. So stick around if you want to have a discussion, and you can come back next week as we do media literacy. And until then, we'll say see you later.